Hello and welcome to the Queermonga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, our volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Queermonga Institute's an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach and we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. On these weekly Sunday discussions, we've had a full spectrum of topics from neuroscience, anthropology, art history, archaeology, mythology, archaeoastronomy, and it goes on and on and on. You're welcome to visit our website at queermongainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member. And of course, we want to thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Queermonga Institute. Today, we go to Iceland. Actually, to be more precise, let's all go on a journey to find the pre-Christian Icelandic traditions, a combination of traditions of folk traditions, spiritualism, practices of healers and seers that bridge these ancestral traditions to the modern world. Here, our guest today, Corinne Dempsey, tells us we find the mediums and the ghost hunters and the spiritual practitioners. They follow the traditions, but they're actually everyday normal people for the most part, holding down day jobs as auto mechanics and social workers and tax accountants. Corinne says she sees the Icelandic spirit work as a multi-tiered bridge for easing the distance between the earth and the spirit realms, and likewise spanning histories, worldviews, and cultures. Corinne is a professor of religious studies at Nazareth College in Rochester, New York, and prior to her work in the Icelandic field work, she dedicated much of her work and study on the South Indian Christianity and North American Hinduism. There's a flip-flop. Let's go to India to look at Christianity, and let's go to America and look at Hinduism. But anyway, Laura, let's do a quick introduction here.
Well, I find this such an important topic for a number of reasons. We have been following in this forum the ancient traditions and how they can be meaningful today, relevant for today, and come forward to today. Well, healing and seeing and mediums and all of that, has been with us from time immemorial. So along with the old ancient tradition of tracking animals in the wild and navigation by the stars, right? This is one that has really remained so vibrant because it bubbles up within us, right? We are called upon to be healers, to put a helping hand to one another, even for the placebo effect, which is undervalued and understudied. I know my own parents, towards the end of their life, very much conventionalist, but turning to us and saying, hey guys, what do you have? And we took my mom to Ipupiara, a rainforest shaman healer. She so enjoyed that. Yeah, we were doing our own hands-on healing, prayer work. You know, you do what you can do, right? You call forth the healer within you when there are those in need. There are people, as Corinne will tell us, who find from the get-go, they are called to be a specialist in that. And I think that's so important. Last week, we were talking with Bianca Harley and her friends about the intention experiments. We can focus this. Much of that was applied towards healing others. We are joining meditations all week about let's do our best for world peace. Mm-hmm. Let's focus on that. Let's try to bring that in. Let's put that into the consciousness and the collective unconscious. That spark within us. I mean, there's a beautiful, you've probably seen this on your social media, beautiful photograph that a mother shared of her little daughter standing on heart printed paper with her hands clasped over her heart and saying, I want to beam out love to everybody on earth and to the monsters so that they can become good. And we know of a few monsters for who we need to do that, right? At work in the world today. And so I just think that that impulse within us, I want this to be inspiring for that, to honor those who feel called upon to specialize in that and do that. And I find it particularly important that academics such as Corinne Dempsey and others are bringing this into the mainstream, bringing this into academia, because we are all anthropologists in the field, right? Amateur we are all studying us.
Yeah.
We are all exploring what potential we have and how to employ it, and what does the world mean, and what is our place in it. And I think that this clash of worldviews means we need to expand our worldview. We need to embrace all that we are. And so I find this a very exciting discussion when academia embraces this. And I also find it so fascinating that this is all our early cultures had, right? This is all they had to work with some herbs and with other modalities.
Traditional, yeah.
This has come with us through the entire arc of human history. And so how it's used today, it shouldn't be outside the mainstream. It should be employed by the mainstream. Let's use everything we have to heal ourselves, to heal one another, to heal our planet and our collective unconscious and our collective consciousness. So, Corinne, first of all, I want to thank Tony for introducing us to Fred Smith, and I want to thank Fred Smith for suggesting Corinne Dempsey. So, Corinne, welcome, and I also have to invite Frederick to say a few words about why he said, hey, bring Corinne on. She's got something important to say. So, welcome to you both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul and Laura. Yeah, one reason that I wanted Corinne to come, and I'm happy that she acceded to our wishes, is that I have long wanted to invite her to my own university, the University of Iowa, for several years since the publication of her book on Iceland. But then it was one thing after another, like particularly the pandemic, that got in the way of any kinds of invitations. And because one of my all-time favorite and closest colleagues at the University of Iowa, professor of psychology, to whom I gave a copy of Corinne's book on Iceland, and who is herself one of the best-known clinical researchers in the field of psychoneuroimmunology, PNI, and maybe it would be worth bringing here sometime. Professor Susan Leckendorf, she was so excited about Corinne's book that she made a trek to Iceland herself just to meet these people. And thanks to Corinne, she actually did meet these people, and she is so happy and so excited. So I think the next best thing to all of us in this group with our common interests can do, besides being transported telekinetically to Iceland right this minute, is to have Corinne give us a report from the front lines.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Fred.
It's nice to know that we beat the University of Iowa to the story.
Oh, yes. I always like to, as a journalist, may want to beat the...
Well, COVID gets in the way of a lot of things. So
Right,
that's part
that's
of it. And But, thank you, Fred.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And you'll be happy to know that Corinne has mentioned coming back and bringing some of the Icelander healers and seers with us so that we can talk with them directly as well. So we'll set up a panel discussion. That will be fun. Thank you.
Where do we start?
Yeah, tell us your personal story, because you started out a skeptic of all of this, and you were lured to Iceland to meet these folks. Tell us that.
Lured, yeah, absolutely. So I've been asked to put together a PowerPoint, which is fun to do because Iceland is so beautiful. You can't take pictures of spirits so much, but we can certainly look at some other things. So yeah, I will walk through this if I can get this to go. Here we go. And shall I do this? Shall I minimize?
What a fabulous picture.
Yeah. And what's funny is I've been trying to remember the name. Can anyone remember the name of this structure? There's a word for it. And now it's
basalt, right?
Basalt. That's it. Basalt. Yes. Okay.
And these natural columns that they make.
Right. Right. So, okay. So yeah, my story is basically a very curvy one. and I can walk you through it. This is my book here on the right, and here I am sitting on basalt. And I got there not by immediately, thinking I need to go to Iceland, but because I've been studying India. And as you rightly said, Paul, is Christianity in India, South India and Kerala, which is a really interesting place. And as you can see here, this is a bus on the left. This is Mary, Vishnu, and it's a place of worship for Muslims. So 3 communities have been living there peacefully. And it's a really fascinating, tropical, beautiful place. I've written about it. And then after that, I did another bit of work with a Hindu temple in the US, which is a goddess temple. And this figure on the left is the goddess Raja Rajeshwari. And this is a ritual where they pour different, during a special occasion, different items on her. And this is yogurt, actually. So I've had, this is a whole nother world of stories. I've had experiences there in India itself and at this temple that have kind of broadened my world in ways that I didn't expect. I mean, this is what to me is really exciting about doing field work. As someone who tries to, keep a even keel on my intellect, there's a part of you, a heart and experience that kind of challenges that. So I've had a lot of experiences leading up to Iceland. So over here is my friend Solveig, who actually happened to die a couple of years ago from, I just feel like I have to say this, of cancer. So she's no longer with us, but she's a dear friend of mine, was a dear friend of mine from graduate school. She and her husband were also at Syracuse University, where I did my PhD in religious studies or religion. And she and her husband were getting degrees in social work. And that was in early 1990s. And we kept in touch. And she was working at a university as a counselor and came to Wisconsin, where we were living at the time, in, I believe it was 2006, on sabbatical. And she was learning about our traditions of counseling in a university in Wisconsin. And she and I would joke. She liked to joke, come to Iceland, you can study us. Mm-hmm. And I would say, well, that really does, I'm sorry, Solveig, it doesn't sound very interesting. I mean, religion in Iceland is way in the background. That, there's a nominal sort of Lutheran state church that people are nominally associated with, and they don't go to church. And, we laughed, wouldn't that be fun? But there's nothing to study. And then one morning over breakfast, she said, I realize what you can do. I know what you can do. And I write about this in the introduction. She said, you can come to Iceland and talk to the people who talk to dead people. So okay, now that sounds a little more interesting. And still, there are a few problems. One is that I'm usually spending time in Southern Indian traditions, and this is Northern Iceland, and I have no background. And the other problem for me personally, and this is what you're referring to, Laura Lee, is that I just didn't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable studying something that I don't feel I can get behind. Mm-hmm. So I want to be supportive of the people that I spend time with, and coming from my experience with just the sort of stereotype of mediums who make money. I didn't know any mediums. I had no exposure, but I just had this sense, I think is wrong, that they can be manipulative, and they can, make great gobs of money based on people who are vulnerable. I didn't feel really comfortable.
And I'm sure some of them are faking it. So
and sure, of
but
course.
Not all,
Okay. So yes, we can admit. So anyway, so I said, okay, that sounds like it's interesting, but I'm not so sure. Mm-hmm. Let me go back. So I just want to show you on the map. So Akureyri, just so you know, is right here. That's where she's from. Reykjavik, which is the hub, is down here on the, can you see my cursor?
Oh, yes, we can.
Okay, good. Okay, so there's Reykjavik. Reykjavik metropolitan area has, I think, something like 200,000, maybe a little bit more now. The entire island population is 300,000. So huge, portion is in Reykjavik. Akureyri is the second largest city, and it has about 17,000 people. So it's tiny, but it's got all sorts of art and music and theater. It's very alive as a city, but it's very tiny compared to Reykjavik. But it's also, as I just showed you, it's this beautiful place. So it's a really lively, wonderful. I like the fact that it's more remote, and it's basically on the end, as you saw, of the fjord, Eyjafjörður. And on either side of the fjord is, on one side, this side over here, is this flat hill. It's a heiði. And on this side, behind us in this photo, are mountains. And you're just surrounded. And so if we look straight ahead, that's going north. Going south, the fjord goes, further in. So this is beautiful Akureyri. So who wouldn't want to go there? So I had to try to think of a way to go. So I thought about it, and I had a sabbatical coming up, and I had this great idea. Oh, what I can do is I was thinking about doing a book on comparing Indian sort of traditions with Euro-Christian traditions. And I ended up writing this book that looks at theologies, folklore, landscapes, and bodies, and how in each of those places we can compare the differences and similarities between these two cultures and places. So this is the Iceland shows up in the chapter on bodies and embodied abilities. And so what I did is I compared what are referred to in India as siddhi abilities that come from yogic practices, austerities, those kinds of things, with what's referred to in Iceland as skignigáfa, which really, gáfa means gift. It's kind of ironic because not everyone wants it. And skigni often is translated to clairvoyance, but that's not, it's too narrow. It's an openness, the gift of openness to the other side. So what's interesting about these two things, I'm happy to actually unpack this, is that they look the same from the outside. Not the same, but there's a lot of similarities. From the outside, they are, in both cases, these people are able to read the future, to read people's hearts, to heal, to do things, that are extraordinary. And they have similar kinds of extraordinary things that they do. The big difference is, this is something I rest on a lot. You'll hear me resting on this, is how they understand where it's coming from. Big difference. So in India, the siddhis are something that you eventually get if you have done well, and your karma is right, and there's a lot of variables. But if you've worked hard, it's a sign that you're on the right track. So they're kind of welcomed, and they happen after you've done a lot of work. On the other hand, in the opposite direction, skignigáfa is something you're born with. And it's not something you've worked hard to do. And it's something that you get and maybe aren't so happy that you have. And eventually, in the case of Andleg you learn to work with it. And then you work with it in a way that's productive. So they are very different in that way. So seen them from the outside, yes. And the other big difference is, in Iceland, skignigáfa is understood to be channeled in many ways, or the openness is access to the spirit world. And in India, in the sort of elite classical tradition, spirits are not okay. So when I told the guru that I spent time with in upstate New York, the other book I wrote on Hinduism in the US, when I told him I was going to Iceland to study people who connected with spirits, he comically kind of shuddered. I mean, that idea for him is not okay. So there's even a taboo about the idea that there would be spirits among. So the view behind
similar to Christianity.
Yeah. Sorry?
Similar to Christianity. There's
taboos. Right.
Right.
You're right. And that raises an interesting thing because we also have Catholicism that has saints, which are dead people. So, yeah,
With
we can
powers.
talk about that
And
later.
people with powers. It's right there in the
Right.
saints.
Oh, yeah.
You're
No,
so right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a
And there's a
conversation.
bodily honoring because you take the parts, right? You preserve
Relics.
pieces of them.
Right.
And Andleg Mal is translated as spirit work.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So there's a work aspect to this, meaning
Right.
you
Right.
may be called, you may be born with a gift, but you've got to do something productive with it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'll try to unpack that a tiny bit I'll just yeah, that's good to remember. Anyway, but how it's understood, where it comes from, is very different from Siddhi's. So the bridges. So this is actually these little lovely makeshift bridges are up on a plateau below Sulur, which is the nearby mountain. Actually, there's two of them that I love to go up into. I talk about this in the introduction. So the reason why I have this picture is I went to Iceland. I did this study. It was 2009, so that I could write, this chapter on bodies, embodied abilities, for this particular book, thinking that would be it. I'll just, write this and it'll be great. I will have spent 3 months with my friend Solveig and Kiddi in their home in Akureyri, and it was great. But what happened, so yeah, it was a good plan. But what happened is only 2 weeks in, it only took 2 weeks. There was a change in me because of what I experienced. And the first one was the stereotype I was carrying around about mediums was completely dashed because these people were not making money. A lot of them did their work for free. And the work that they do is either healing or trance work, which we can talk about in more detail. Some people are more traditional mediums that people visit, but they're few in number and they were not getting rich. And like you said, Paul, for the most part, these folks had day jobs. So they were people who, like you listed, all of, the great regular jobs like car mechanic and tax accountant and high school or junior college teacher and construction worker. I mean, it goes on, IT worker, et cetera. So that was an opening for me, is to say, okay, these are great people. And the stories they tell are really earnest and beautiful and hard. I mean, they have, and even in a short period of time, they were trusting me with these stories, which felt like an honor. And then the final straw was in a trance session where a friend of mine came through that I could not deny, who had died of a heart attack a year and a half before that. And he and I were finishing a co-edited book. And do you want me to tell that story now, or should I keep going?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, which one? Keep going
Tell the story.
Okay. All right. So yeah, it was my first trance session. And going into this, what's interesting, the people who've written about what has been referred to as spiritualism are working in Reykjavik, typically. There's a few books out that were written a while before mine. They call it spiritualism, which is really not what people are calling it now. And they didn't, as far as anything I've read, get to go to any of these trance sessions. So because I think I was in Akureyri, it's a smaller town, people knew people. For whatever reason, I was allowed in and then continued to be allowed into these sessions. So this is my very first, watching someone go into trance, watching spirits kind of fill their bodies and speak. I mean, it was mind blowing. I didn't know what to think of it. I mean, what do you think? Anyways, in a circle of people. So there are 8 of us in this circle with folding chairs. We put in this room in this building that they reserve for these things. And Halldor was the trance medium, and he did his session. It was fascinating, and I write about that. And it was after the session, his English wasn't too good. So we were all sort of talking and people were interpreting. We were telling him how the session went because he didn't remember. That's how it works when you're in trance. You're not aware. So people were filling him in, who showed up, who came into his body. And he was just sitting there looking kind of at me, but to the side. And finally he spoke to Minerva, I was sitting next to him, and she said, he sees somebody next to you. And so Minerva, is getting the information from Haldor, and she says, he sees someone next to you who's wearing a dark suit and a tie. Does that sound familiar? And I'm not going to say, oh yeah, I know, I know. So I said, no, I don't know. Can you say more? And Haldor looks some more, and then he says, he was a teacher. He was an excellent teacher. His students loved him. And then I thought, oh, that could be my friend Selva, who had died a year and a half before. He wore dark suits and striped ties. He was a teacher beloved by everyone. But I didn't want,
Right.
I didn't want to say, oh, I know who that is. I mean, I just, right? I'm skeptical.
Yes.
So,
yeah, I would be.
so I
too.
said, can you say more? And Haldor kind of laughs, like, oh, you're going to make me work now. And so we sat for a while longer, and he said, he's holding a book. And Haldor was confused because he said, it's like you wrote this book together, but I'm not sure. And there's an essay in it that seems like maybe you wrote for him. I'm not sure. It's hard. And he couldn't think of the word for essay, so they're talking about, was his book? It was confusing. There's an essay. Did we write it? And he said, he just wants to let you know that he's really happy with the book. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to ask you for more information. I told him I had a friend who died of a heart attack, et cetera. He's a teacher who wore clothing like that. And then he and I had co-edited a book on levity in India. Of course, it's all in India, that he and I had sort of worked on the introduction together, and then his chapter. And it had just come to my house for the final sort of editing. And because he was gone, I had to edit his chapter for him and the introduction. And not knowing, I didn't like doing that without him for many reasons. Academically, I didn't like not getting his permission, but also I was mad at him for leaving. So I remember praying to him and saying, Selva, I hope this is okay. I hope this is okay. So that's when I thought, there is no way that Haldor could know that I had this friend who was a teacher who wore these clothes, who co-wrote a book with me. I mean, there was
And
just
you had a
no
message
way.
for you in
No way.
response to your plea.
Yeah, and I wasn't even so amazed by the message, because the message was pretty simple, but the fact that they would pinpoint that. So it was from that point, I thought, all right, not only are these people like me, and they're with regular lives, I relate to them. I can support them because they're not, making bundles of money. And now I even feel like there's something to what they're doing. So this is the bridge. So I bridged. That was my bridge, from one worldview to a different one. And I feel like there's this important quality to doing ethnography. I don't want to say because that sounds a bit high-handed, but humility is so important. It takes you places, it's a bridge. So in a way, that's what allowed me. It's like, all right, enough. I'll come on board. And this brought me to a different place.
I agree that humility is the bridge. It's like you don't get through the eye of the needle without dropping some of that baggage that blinds us.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So, and I've been staring at this beautiful scenery. So
yeah.
There's so much about the landscape, so much about being in nature that also that entryway, isn't there?
Yeah. And so what I'm going to do is a quick overview, like you had sort of suggested, of what Andleg Maul is. And then I'm going to finish with some spectacular pictures. And that, I think, plays a big role. The sort of the power and the magnificence and the actual danger of the beauty and the landscape plays a role. I totally agree. Okay. So just a quick overview of what I'm talking about. And this is another thing that before we started, we were talking about how they understand their own tradition, which here is Andleg Maul. If an A has a little thing over it, it's pronounced ow. So Andleg means it means spirity. It's the adjective for spirit, which is ande, A-N-D-I. Ande is spirit. So spirity, and maul is like matters or stuff. So it's like spirity stuff. And so when I was first told, and this was the second time I was there, no one told me. I kept using the word spiritualism or spiritisme, which is the Icelandic term for it. And nobody corrected me until in trance, one of the spirits said, you really shouldn't be calling it spiritualism. Okay, and so he told me, he couldn't think of an English translation, and it was Andleg Mau. So I had to go around and ask people, is this true? Is this what you call this? He goes, oh yeah, this is what we call it. It's like, why didn't anybody tell me? And then we had to figure out, nobody had translated it. So we translated it. Spirity stuff, yeah, but more purposefully, as you're saying, Laura Lee, it's spirit work. And that everyone agreed is a good translation, because it's really about doing something that's productive.
Mm-hmm.
So
you don't have to work to get there, as you were pointing out, but you have to work with it once you're handed it.
What you have the quote unquote.
Exactly.
I really appreciate those distinctions in the underlying premise that you make.
Yeah. So spiritualism is, it is in the background. They do recognize that it's the root, and so they didn't correct me. And these three men are responsible for bringing it to Iceland. Einar Kvaran is actually from Akureyri, and he was in Canada. They believe that that's where he picked it up, because in the US and Canada it was kind of a big deal. In the late 1800s, it was kind of waning actually at that point. So he brought it back to Iceland through reading books, moving to Reykjavik, and meeting up with Haraldur Nielsen, who was a famous theologian, a really charismatic preacher, and eventually a leader in the independence movement that argued that their Lutheran church was scientifically sound. It was modern, as opposed to the Danish old-fashioned Orthodox church. And helping him make that argument was spiritualism, because that was scientific. You could prove that there's life after death. Mm-hmm. So it was going on through the power of this man, through the power of the movement toward independence, which happened a little bit later, but it was a movement in the early 1900s. 1905 is when it started. And then nothing would have worked if it weren't for Indra the son, who I have a hard time with his last name, who was just sort of by the way, he happened upon one of they called them seances at that time. Mm-hmm. And he had an aunt who was interested, and so she would attend. And so he was a farm boy who was coming to work as a printer in Reykjavik. Anyway, he ended up just sort of coming to one of these just cuz. And it turns out that all these things started happening with his presence. So they thought, before he arrived, as Kvaran referred to, the situation was all one big mess, but Indra made things happen. And he actually was spectacular in various abilities. He actually comes through, so does Haraldur Bjössi, one of the mediums, and he says, when he comes through Bjössi, I faked some stuff. But anyway, he was spectacular. He went into trance eventually, and he made the movement go. In addition to Haraldur, because there were things really kind of unbelievable that were happening. And they were studied by a scientist at University of Iceland in Reykjavik at that time, who came in as a skeptic, and after his research, he left as a believer because of Indra. So he was a very talented medium. Between the three of them, it really took off. It was called spiritualism. It was part of the Lutheran Church. So they were like, we're scientific, we're the Lutheran, Icelandic Lutheran Church. So until the 1950s, it was supported by the Icelandic Lutheran Church, state church. And then in the 1950s, there's a neo-Orthodox movement. The bishop, condemned it, and it became condemned by the official church. So no longer were priests encouraged, to connect with these spiritualist folks. And it kind of went underground. That was the 1950s. It stayed underground until really the 1990s. And then it became okay again. So at that point, it sort of, I think part of the reason why it became okay again is because Iceland at that point had kind of come into its own. Their economy was better. People were, living longer lives. They were able to sort of stand up for themselves and say, this isn't superstition. This is what we do. But it's not universally accepted. So that's another.
Well, I have to tell you really quickly, and Paul, you can tell this story later.
Yeah, I'll tell my story later. Let's hold
But I just want to mention Paul's great-grandmother, Effie.
Yeah, let me share that story later.
Okay.
Because I really want to keep
He is a spiritualist in his family history, so that will be interesting.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. In a small town near the Canadian-U.S. border. Yeah.
Okay. And so let me just say the difference between spiritualism. So spiritualism, as a result, never really took hold, even when the church was supporting it. And the difference is that in Iceland, they don't have spiritualist churches. And they don't have weekly gatherings where they do this. I think there's 7, sort of a creed that they say together. So spiritualism has a structure. It's loose, but there is a structure. But in Iceland, there really is no particular structure. Reykjavik has more of a structure, has more sort of traditional mediums in it. It's closer to spiritualism. But when you move all the way across the country to Akureyri, that goes away. So it is really, really loose. And their creed is that everyone uses their powers differently. There's no one right way to do it. So it is an interesting sort of very open, don't let your ego get in the way and say that your way is the right way. I mean, they're very kind of insistent upon that because I think that can happen, that there's superstars and then they say, well, that's the best way to do it. And they really try not to do that. But what you can see in these rooms. So in both these rooms here are at the Saulo, which is Saulo Rannsóknarfélag, which means the Society for Soul Research or Psychic Research. Soul and psyche are the same word. And they don't do research. It's more just a place to hold trance medium sessions. So this room here is where we had our folding chairs. And also healing sessions. And people do it at home as well. It doesn't have to happen here. But I'm just showing you these images because look, you can see the influence is, there's Jesus. Mary is huge. So Mary's hung in there, even though they became Lutheran after they were Catholic. Mary has never left. And down here we got, again, Mary and Jesus. And right here, what they see to be as their sort of anchors are the mediums who've come before them, or middles who've come before them. And so a lot of them come through the middles today, the mediums today in trance, or they're inspired by them. And that's what they see to be their roots. That's what they talk about. And that's what they kind of feel justified by, is this tradition, not Reykjavik, so it's an Akureyri tradition. So I have to mention, of course, the tradition from the sagas. And what they talk about in the sagas more loosely are Seið Kona and Seið Karl, which are seers that are men and women that are able to see the future and to perhaps heal. I mean, the same idea, but even more sort of connected to traditions having to do with trance is this very interesting word, vulva. There were women who were itinerant seers and healers who would go, and they actually, in Iceland as well as Greenland, I mean, they traveled around. I have a story of actually an archaeological find that my friend Kiddy was part of, that involved a woman that they thought was maybe a vulva. And she would have a circle like they do with the trance circle, a circle of people who would be with them to offer support and protection. They would often do an incantation, a song that would allow her to go into trance. And she was understood to work with different kinds of spirits, and it included nature spirits, to be able to prophesy, to say what was wrong. Why is your crop failing? Or, what is wrong with your sick whoever? And she would be given gifts in kind afterwards. So she would travel around. So there are definitely similarities that are spoken about in the sagas. So finally, the one thing I just want to say is that when I asked people all the time, what do you think this is coming from? What do you think the history is? And the other one is, why Iceland? I think that's my next. Oh, no, it's not. But anyway, so where do you feel like, I would bring this up. Do you feel like your tradition is rooted in this tradition, that your tradition now is rooted in this older tradition. And I mentioned this to Laura Lee, that really there was only one person who really liked that idea and really, wanted me to write about it. And I do mention it a little bit, but the others didn't, not only because they understood themselves as connected to these earlier healers, and some of them were relatives. This runs in the family. And Paul, I don't know, it is something that runs in the family. Anyway, so the other part of it is not only they felt connected to these earlier people, but they also felt, and this is something I remember from Matti when I asked him about this, do you feel like this is something connected to the old saga tradition? I felt he was a little insulted. And the reason for that is that he doesn't see this as something that is culturally formed. He felt it was something that he had no choice in. It made his life really difficult for a while. And it is just something that it's between him and the spirits, and it's something he does. It has nothing to do with any kind of outside cultural influence. So that's why I kind of stick to that sort of pitch, because that was really important for him. He doesn't want to reduce it to influences from culture. Of course it's influenced from, of course it is. Of course the way they do things and the priorities are. But yeah, he just wouldn't buy that. So I
guess my take on it would be it's a natural ability that is expressed within the human, around the world, around culture. It's just part of us. That was kind of my point. It's going to show up over and over and over again.
Yeah. Well, and that everyone would be on board with. Yeah. Everyone would say, absolutely. This is everywhere. We are not freaks, really. I mean, that and to me, that's one of the most important parts of talking about things like trance, which would be otherwise referred to as possession. And Fred can talk to this, in exotic.
Not all trance is possession trance, but let me just put that out there. But
okay. Yeah. And in their case, it is. Yeah, I know that's true. Right. But anyway, we think of things as typically related, if it is trance or possession, to exotic locales. Anthropologists, I mean, that's where we find it. Right. And I think the important part of
because it hasn't been suppressed there, right? And people were allowed to develop that in other outside of Western society. But if we don't embrace it, it will remain other. And then humanity won't be able to take advantage of those gifts of understanding of the world, the way it works, and the healing conduits that could be applied. I guess that's my argument.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying that the nice
I don't mean my argument with you, just my argument with society.
Yeah. Right. And so I was just saying that I appreciate being able to do this in Iceland, because they are just like your average mainstream white person from the US, so they have this too. So I was happy to be able to find this there, because it's not far away. And I don't want to make them sound like they're far away. And so on that note, and then I'll just show some images. This is the image on the left is really meant to kind of, it's just a kind of image of where religion sits in Iceland. It's tiny and the landscape is big. I think it is really so powered in many ways by this enormous landscape. And this image on the right, in terms of the culture in Iceland, I think, yes, they are very much like us. They are well connected to our global society. Incredible English speakers. I learned a bit of Icelandic, but didn't use it all the time. And they're also very proud of being grounded, and not necessarily what I think the stereotype is of Iceland. And I'm saying this on behalf of my friends who really wanted me to be clear about this. We like to think of elves and fairies in Iceland, and there's a big tourist industry around that. But there, people are not unanimously believing in this, nor are they unanimously believing in spirits. It's a soft skepticism, I will say. But this image on the right is one of my Kiddy, the man my friend Solveig's husband, is a Marxist, atheist, materialist, and he loves, this is his favorite place at a cemetery for a man named Brage, who was an ironsmith, worked on ships, and he just didn't like any of this God talk or anything. So he made his own hammersickle star. It was a statement, and I think this is a thread in Iceland that we mustn't ignore. There's this a real hard-minded, everyday survival thread. None of this woo-woo. They can be incredibly insistent upon that. So I want to give voice to that. But religion.
I also want to say that I think skepticism is important because, yes, there is fraud going out there. There's misinformation, there's misunderstanding, there's magical thinking, there's all of that. There's capitalism, there's wolves in sheep's clothing, there's all of that. So approach everything with a skeptical mind. Have an open, not a gaping mind, I always say.
Yeah. Well,
but also it's fundamentalist to take up one position and then hardline it and not look at any other evidence. I guess, and to be arrogant in that stance. So, I mean, it's a fine line that we all walk, wending our way through life and understanding it. So I agree with you.
And thank you. And I feel that this was an important part of the people who spoke with me, who are in this tradition, Andleg Mal. They wanted to be really clear that they were not just riding along on a whim. That this was something that they were absolutely meant to do, and we can talk about this later. Born with it, frightened by it when they were in their late teens and early 20s, and there's a lot of no nonsense. There's a lot of no nonsense amongst these people. They're not making it up. So and skeptical about their own abilities, and then being surprised constantly. Yeah. So it's a soft skepticism, and it's a careful belief. There's this. It's a really interesting kind of line. So it's not, all rainbows and leprechauns and fairies. So, I just want to be really clear about that. So the other question I would ask people now, I'll just show you just a few images. When people would talk about these abilities, I would ask not just the people within the tradition, but people who were, skeptics. But again, soft skeptics. Everyone has a story, which is really fun. Your most skeptical people you meet will have stories. But I would ask them, why Iceland? Why is this going on here so much? Like you're saying, Laurelie, sorry, that we smother, hide, ignore abilities, dismiss when they're there. Why is it so abundant here in Iceland? And everyone, regardless of where they stood, said, when you live in this very remote, so on the left, this is in the middle of a sea, of the ocean, and this is actually the images of the Eyjafjallajökull, the 2010 volcano. You can see that down there, the steam. And on the right, this is the West Fjords, which are just phenomenal. There's a little town. I mean, it's completely, until recently, cut off in the winter from everything. The sense of remoteness and then the complete dark during the winter, it creates a certain awareness, a certain sensitivity, a certain need. And someone, Valga, their friend, said, people also died of tuberculosis up until much later than the rest of Europe. And so you need a connection to people there's so many sort of regular reasons. And then there's just the phenomenal landscape. Those are lupin. Lupin are so funny because they do really well on ground that is full of lava. And so they eat up the lava and they make soil. So it's really awesome. But the problem is they are invaders. And so there's a huge argument over whether it's okay to have lupin or not, because they're not natural to Iceland, but man, they're making lots of soil anyway. So it's funny, the arguments that we all have. And the moss, the moss to me was almost my absolute favorite thing about Iceland, and going hiking in these mountains, and the flowers and the colors, and every season it would change colors, just so beautiful. And the waterfalls down here. This is on the left. Actually is Gordafoss, it's called Gordafoss, which is the Falls of the Gods, because when Iceland became officially a Christian country in the year 1000, Thorgeir, who was the head sort of chieftain, through the gods that he had in his temple off these falls. It was like the final end to the or old tradition officially, but it lived on. And Dettifoss on the right here is, you can see little people. So that is how big that is. It's phenomenal.
Wow.
So there's power in the land. There's power in the beauty and in the waterfalls. And of course, the fire under our feet. This is an area, as my friend Kiddi, he actually worked at power plants are in these areas. The houses are heated by these
Geothermal.
Yeah, geothermal energy, and you can go to places and swim in it, geysers. I mean, it's so alive in so many ways. And then, of course,
just the opposites, ice and fire together.
Yeah.
Are so interesting. So,
and this is the more recent, very recent, I think it's still going, near Reykjavik. There's Reykjavik volcano. And this is just the sky with the volcanic, it's just amazing. And of course, the Northern Lights are also, my friend Solveig said when she was a kid, she used to get in her little snowsuit and make snow angels and look up with her friends at the Northern Lights and talk, how we do that with clouds. Oh, I see an angel. I see this or that. And they would see it in the Northern Lights and see what they could see. So here's Gordafoss on the right, that Fall of the Gods. And on the left, that's our Reykjavik and the cover of my book. And this is the last slide. I just think it's in one of the volcanoes. They actually have lightning in the midst of them. So my thought about humility is it plays a role in bringing you somewhere different. And I think when nature is so big and powerful, there's a humility that builds in it because what's around you is much bigger than you are. So that was something that my friend Valgarður talked about, is the humility involved in living in Iceland opens you to things that you wouldn't otherwise be open to. So I'm
also wondering, you're so close to those Northern Lights. I mean, that's where the sun is sending its energy and it's coming in through the poles and it's filtering through in the magnetic field, but that's the portal for all that magnetic force, and you're sitting right there in its field.
Good
maybe
point.
a little stronger, who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, they've said a lot about even red ochre being an iron-based mineral and how indigenous cultures like to paint themselves with it, perhaps to be more receptive to Earth's magnetic field. I mean, there's interesting science along those lines.
And thank you for reminding me. So the people who are not part of the tradition say, it's dark and it's powerful and these things psychologically affect us.
Yes.
But the people who are part of the thank you, it's helping me remember, who are in the midst of all this feel of the spirit work are convinced that there's energy and power in the land itself, partly because it's in the middle of this ocean, partly because of what's going on, below and above. And that makes them particularly susceptible to something that is a humanly shared ability. Absolutely. So.
Yeah, and there's something about being remote, so you're not getting the crossing of all the EM fields generated by our technology and our cities. The air is cleaner, and there's So, I had to say that the film Eurovision, really entertaining, where they feature the fairies and the elves. I hadn't really known that about that part of the world, that was a huge tradition, and they leave little fairy houses in the side of the woods and they feed the fairies, and you have to believe it to want to partake of the tradition, right? It's a folk tradition and it's fun, but
I mean that does exist, but they were making fun of it.
I know, but it was a fun.
I don't know anyone who leaves stuff for fairies and elves, but I do feel but
children maybe like Easter eggs. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but it does exist, but I think it gets bigger from the outside because it's interesting or exotic. So it does exist, but they also make fun.
An artist friend has told me that cities, small towns that want to attract tourists have created fairy doors to go find around the city, and that they've invited artists to create little doors, and so the tourists come and they bring the kids and they go on a hunt. Right. So I mean,
which is lovely.
I appreciate the folk traditions and celebrating them as mythic, as a tradition, as folk.
Sure.
They don't have to literally believe it. But
Well-
again, we've talked with John and Kathleen Matthews, who do believe in fairies and have had encounters. So I don't
they're right.
discount it.
Yeah,
I'm
they're-
just like,
Yeah.
interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
coming back to why Iceland, I mean, that obviously,
Yeah.
as you showed the pictures and the power of the place, and I mean, it puts you into a meditative state, just having that sensory deprivation
Like just
in
to
the
feed
winter.
the eyes.
And
puts you-
that would make sense to me that it would create that state of experience, opening one's other elements of experience. So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well-
So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so then Laura had mentioned earlier that I had this experience in my life that kind of put me to where I am today. And you've done the best at bringing that back into my memory, because I kind of had let a lot of those details slip away over the years. But when I was 18 years old,
Huh.
I just had this awakening in my teenage years. That's when I really started waking up, and all of a sudden things didn't make sense. I started asking a lot of questions, and traditional religions were not giving me the answers, and I started looking outside of things. So a long story short, I got together with a group of friends who were also interested in this kind of research and understanding. And we found a spiritualist church in Augusta, Maine. I grew up in central Maine. So I went to Augusta, Maine, to this church, and it looked like a traditional kind of Christian church. The difference being that they had the trance medium on the stage, the pastor or the minister or whatever the title was, and she would just look into the crowd and give messages and stuff. And so here I am, sitting in the middle of this crowd of people, not knowing anybody except for the friends that I traveled with, and she picks me out of the crowd. She goes, "Oh my gosh, your grandmother, or maybe before, has a message. She's so proud. She has so much to share with you." She says, "How did she go? And she does give me details about, and I don't know the details of how my great grandmother died. She told me the details. I had to go back later and talk to my mother about it. It completely was right on. And she also started saying, "You're going to be a teacher. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be," she started downloading all this stuff. And my friends were like, "Oh my God, what an ego boost this has become. Let's get out of here." But it was like this amazing moment for me to have this experience. And it opened my doors. Then I started investigating. My mother was one of 9 children. My grandmother was one of 22. Single birth,
Oh my
Children.
God.
22 children.
The president at the time sent her an award.
She deserved it. Oh my
Yeah. Up until recently, I think it still held the record for the most single births in the state of the United States.
From one human
So this great grandmother of mine became like the town healer or whatever. So she didn't take care of just her 22 kids. She was taking care of everybody. There was something that was going on there, and the stories have been documented, and people have dedicated, because of the number of children. They still have family reunions every year, and 100 years later or whatever, 110 years later.
Half the town is related to Paul.
So they have these reunions.
Well, I bet.
They have these reunions, and so the stories continue. But anyway, I wanted to mention that it's the only time I went to a quote unquote spiritualist
I think you
church.
should go back. See what else they
And
have.
Oh,
I didn't
you
even know if they
should.
exist, but in Maine it still existed, and it was like that moment in time that kind of made it okay for me to pursue what I'm pursuing and where I'm at.
That's amazing. And you knew about your grandmother as a spiritualist. I mean, you did have that information.
I did. Well, this is more research that came out late. There was family members that started writing books on her and stuff, and started researching. So a lot of stuff I didn't know at the time. I was just an innocent teenage kid, just like, what the hell is this? I don't know. And so anyway, that's the story that Laura was referring to. So coming back to what you're sharing today, and seeing the efficacy, seeing that these people lived, because the people that in the family that I grew up with were very normal, down to earth people. The term New Age does not apply, and so it really helps hearing your story and see the details of what you found on this journey to Iceland. It kind of connects the dots for me a lot. So
Yeah. Can I just say one thing? Because I feel like there's a million things I could say, and I'm trying not to talk too much because it gets boring.
I'm sorry, but you're the guest, so we
I'm
expect you to talk.
sensitive to that.
You talk all the time.
As a teacher, it's like, oh, I don't want to blather on. But it's interesting to me to hear, Paul, that you were 18 when this happened. this kind of like what's going on. And that you have, because really these people, not 100%, but often it is something that runs in families. There's definitely, it's like, a musical ear. And they made really clear, which I think is important, we all have different gifts. Just because you have abilities doesn't make you a better person. It's how you use the gifts and all that good stuff. But the pattern almost always, and I talk about this in the chapter Skigni Galva, how that works, this ability, the gift, is that it's kids are open. So these people who are open are really open as kids. And many of them take it in stride and they see stuff. And if their family knows about it and say, oh yeah, you see grandpa, it's no big deal. Some are a little unnerved, but as kids, usually it's fine. But then it's latent. So this would be something like, ooh, and what the stories they often tell, which I think it's kind of interesting because I teach about this stuff and I ask my students, the imaginary friend, not imaginary. So, we say, oh, you have an imaginary friend, so they have a lot of imaginary friends that they swear, they think later, oh yeah, actually they kind of did communicate with me. I probably wasn't imagining. Anyway, it goes away usually in, maybe early adolescence, and it's latent for a while. And then in late teens, early 20s, it comes back, oftentimes with a vengeance. And so that is when you worry, because it's scary and because you think you might be going crazy. So these are people in the modern world who know that psychotic breaks happen. So I'm thinking 18, yeah, that sounds about right. When you're late teens. So they go to usually a medium to check it out. Am I crazy? Am I seeing spirits? And they'll say one or the other. And oftentimes they'll get a second opinion from a psychologist who will tell them, usually corroborate. They'll say, I don't believe in spirits, but whatever's going on with you, you're sane, you're fine, you're mentally sound. And what's happening that second time around is that their spirits, according to their view, spirits are going, hello, I know you can see me, hello, hello. And it only stops, the horror only stops when you say, okay, stop it, I'll work with you.
I see you, yeah.
And let's now make parameters. You may not bother me at this time of day. You're only going to be with me when I'm in, and once they do that, they can relax.
Interesting.
So yeah, anyway, I just think that's, the 18-year-old is a.
Well, I
will say that Paul has certain superpowers, and one of them is he'll say, I need this object to, and then it will show up 2 days later through weird circumstances. And the other one you have is that he does talk to the departed in dreams and deep meditations. He will wake up with dreams. My parents are as close to him as his parents were, and his sister.
Yeah. And
you have exact conversations that he can repeat. Yeah.
Anyway,
in dreams.
We all have those kinds of experiences.
Common.
That was common for me. And the most traumatic part of that transition to 18 years old wasn't so much the anxiety about the experience itself. It was the outside world wasn't ready for that shift and change. My mother was very concerned, and she set up an appointment and had me go talk to the local pastor of the church. Oh. And he sat down with Reverend Smith, and he sat down with me. He says, Paul, what is this stuff? What are you into? What are you looking at? And so I had this conversation. I said, I'm starting to connect all these dots. I'm starting to see that there's a whole mythology behind Christianity. And I started giving this guy a lecture, and he just looked at me. He says, Paul, that sounds like the stuff they talk about in California. So anyway, I always thought you'd want to follow the ministry. I thought you'd want to be So anyway, I had this whole thing change. This is the most I've ever talked about this story, even to Laura. So, I do appreciate the fact that you triggered this. Yeah, you triggered this.
This is interesting because I have found when, especially when I was in the midst of this, I've moved on to a different project now, but I still connect with Iceland. When I tell these stories, or especially when I was, and it's on my mind, and I like flying somewhere, to California, where my mom lives, between there and Wisconsin or New York, people would come out with stories, oh my gosh, the stories I have heard. And people would say, I've never told anyone this, but, let me tell you, or going to a conference and the woman who is like the administrative assistant. I mean, I won't do it now, but I mean, amazing stories. And they wanted to tell me because they have them, but there's no place to put them. There's no place. There's no culture. Yeah.
collecting that.
You keep it to yourself. You learn very quickly. You can't talk about these things.
Yeah.
You get shut down.
So what a shift for you to go from this world of research looking at Christianity in India and looking at Hinduism in the U.S. and then having a friend say, come visit us.
Well, what pushed you into study religion and spirituality in the first place?
Right.
What was your moment where you said, this is my life path, I have some things to figure out?
I think I was always kind of I don't know, that's a really good question. I always loved God. I was raised in Bay Area in California, and my very open-minded parents, my mom in particular, Buddhist meditator, and I just thought religion was fascinating. I was never like evangelical fundamentalist, but always kind of liked it and thought God was awesome, and found God in nature. I spent half my life up in trees and found, this arms of God, mossy, big oak tree limbs. That's just sort of where. And then I ended up doing an undergrad degree in counseling, and learned that counseling is really depressing when I worked at a crisis center. They were having crises, and I just didn't, it was just too much. So I went to the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley and thought I would get a degree in pastoral counseling. So I could throw, spirituality into the mix while I'm being a counselor. And once there, I got really interested in theology, liberation theology, which is a political left, Marxist theology. And that was really interesting to me. And ended up getting just all over the place, ended up writing a thesis on Mary, Virgin Mary, and how she's understood in Latin America, as like a powerful revolutionary. And by feminists, some feminists in a way, that's different than the mainstream Mary.
Yeah,
interested
in Guadalupe Church there.
So anyway, so from there I just thought, female divinities, really interesting. Where are there female divinities? India. So I applied. Syracuse let me in. So anyway, so I ended up going to India because of this interest in female divinity, thinking I would study a woman who's a Christian saint who I thought was kind of revolutionary, but it turns out she wasn't. She did miracles. I just didn't understand how sainthood worked. In our country, sainthood, sort of represents a way of being a model. In other places, they are miracle workers. So I had to totally switch gears. And that's where, I would hear these stories and go, oh, okay, that's how it works. And it was so moving and so beautiful to have, again, so honored to have people talk to me. Tony asked a question. How did it happen? You were invited into a trance session. So interesting to hear how these things happen. And I it's just connecting to that question. All the work I've done has been so humbling, in that people share with me, and this is true for all of us, I think, who are able to do this kind of work, share with me things that are so important and near and dear to their hearts. I mean, I don't miss that for a second. That's why I have to emphasize certain parts of Iceland, just because I want to, represent as well as I can the different views and not give, to paint it one color. But in any case, this has been for me such an honor and so humbling. And getting into the trance medium session, I think I just got really lucky. The one person who loves connecting Andleg Mal to the sagas, he's the town accountant. He loved that. He loved history, and he gave me all these, tips for finding ways to, connect them. He also was part of. Yeah, exactly. You would love to. Yeah. Boy, yeah, you should get him on. Definitely. Anyway, he was in a trance session, and he asked Haldor, who was the head guy, excuse me, and the other people, permission to have me come. And so little by little, I just started to get to know the community. And I guess they thought I wasn't going to run away with their secrets or make fun of them, so I kept.
You do inspire trust and sincerity. Miracles. So you mentioned the Catholic Church will recognize miracles. How do they define miracles? And whereas in Iceland, these abilities are natural abilities, right? They're not miraculous. They're just part of us. And then is a miracle something that we need the intervention of the divine Is it grace that comes down and moves something along and makes a shift? I mean, let's talk about how we understand miracles and where these Andleg Mal fits in that whole scheme. Could you speak to that? And we'll take some more comments.
So just like their insistence that nobody, this is what I really appreciate. I appreciate a lot about what's going on with the people I met in Iceland and in Akureyri. I appreciate that they are insistent that there's no one right way to do things, and there's no best way to do things, and there's not a hierarchy and even if you have no abilities, like I wish I could see spirits, but I can't. Just like they really want to make sure that everyone, equality. And I think that's an Icelandic, a Nordic kind of feature, is this idea of equality. Just in the same way, explaining what's going on is not codified. It's not, like now we've got it. And this is in spiritualism, they explain the different levels of, I've been to a few spiritualist camps, and they explain, that you have this spirit that's guiding you, and it's got this title, and, various, it's very organized.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not a harsh dogma, but they've got it figured out, how it all works. and folks in Iceland will always say, this is my experience, but we don't know. We're not dead. We don't know. We just get hints. And I talk about humility.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that about them. And they're open. And I finish with that. My last chapter is about, this crazy session I went to, and they just, I don't know, it's something. Anyway, but so to your question, they give it different names, this God, this blessing, this grace. Oftentimes it's referred to as God. Some people really don't like to use that word because they feel God has been so manipulated as a figure,
as a concept.
They oftentimes use the word orka, which means energy, which is kind of generic, and a term that a lot of them use that kind of bring the two together is alheimsorka, which means universal energy. And it's the thing that through us, grounded on the earth, we are able to sort of generate through spirits that are working with us. We've had agreement, they're not going to bug us anymore. So in that healing session, trance session, as they need us, and there are many ways, and they're not going to say this is the only way, but they need us through the energy of the earth to help generate more of that power that they have access to as because they've agreed to this, to help heal or bring energy into a trance session. Yeah, and a trance is, you're right. When they say trance, they mean pretty much going under. There's different levels, but they do mean that.
Different varieties, yeah.
Anyway, so it's sometimes called God. It is flowing. And I would say that is similar, although we don't think of it that way, as how sainthood is understood traditionally, officially. So I think we, as on the ground people in different parts of the world, not in the US, think of saints themselves as having power. But actually the official, Vatican view is that they're just conduits. God is the one that has power. They're now in heaven. We know they're in heaven because of, we've proved it because we've canonized them. And so we know that they can act as conduits for God. So in the end,
healers understand it. I'm a hollow bone. I'm a conduit for the flow of this universal energy, and now direct it to various purpose. And the founder of our institute, Dr. Gumman, would agree with that. We're peers. We're all brothers and sisters on the web of life. There is no hierarchy. We're all equal. Everything is sacred. And I had a really lovely discussion with our ethnomusicologist, Lawson, and a couple in Australia that are part of our community. He is a microbiologist and describing, debating what could spirits be. And he said, I just see it as it's all one universe. It's all one. And these are emergent properties, emergent attributes of life force, of evolution. I go, that is my concept too. But it's nice to use, that's many words. Can we use a catch-all term? Universal energy, the spirits. We each define all these things for ourselves. And I think that is such a sacred trust, to put our own worldview together ourselves, not to adhere to the dogma forced on us, but we need to assemble that for ourselves, put the pieces of the puzzle in place based on our own experience, our own inner directions, our own what's talking to us. I don't know. So I so appreciate that point of view and worldview. I'm there with you.
Yeah.
You were in the middle of saying something, sorry. To add that.
That's good.
So, you were saying that the Catholic Church...
Oh no, I think I was done. I was
Okay.
done. I was just saying that they actually understand it in a similar way,
In
and
a
that they're
similar way.
conduits. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the spirits, then they don't have power. They are also conduits, like a saint
Thank
would
you.
be.
Yeah.
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 But the difference, obviously, is that in collaboration with the saints, you're doing healing on earth. But you could say that anyway. For sainthood, you're praying, to a saint as a conduit, and bringing. Yeah. So
Yeah,
anyway.
it's the same dynamics, just different languaging around it, different conception. She's reading the chat. Go ahead. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, I was
Yeah.
just going to say, coming also back to Hinduism, is there an element of trance mediumship included in the religion, in that whole concept? How do they bring forth knowledge in that kind of way?
Okay,
That would
how
be
did they have the sages
a
come
parallel- a
through to
parallel.
write the verses of the...
Yeah.
of the
That's a
Vedas?
question for Fred. I mean, it's
It's put through.
he knows far more than I do about the intricacies, because
Yeah.
I think, yeah, sure, there's people who on cue will become, possessed of different deities and offer healing and things like that.
Let's say
But
be a conduit for.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Fred, because there's so many different ways, different parts of India. So what do you think, Fred?
Yeah, Paul, that's an amazing question, and please ask me in 2 weeks. That'll give me something to talk about in the session in which I'm present.
Okay, well, I'm
And,
making note.
yes, Corinne, you're absolutely invited to attend us. Yes, I mean, just like Corinne was kind of incidentally invited to this trance session, as Tony asked, I found myself in that situation innumerable times, invited to trance sessions, and then I would have some kind of exotic experience, and kind of like Corinne had with her late collaborator. And it's just one thing leads to another, but the place where I've done most of my field work, at least since my book on this was published in 2006, has been in the Himalayas. And up in the Himalaya, it's like trance and possession and mediumship. That's like, you could just call it that sort of country up there. And like Corinne experienced, most of these people aren't mercenaries. They're not interested in making money. They have day jobs. They live the way that their neighbors live, mostly. And for India, it's a prosperous area, but it's fairly poor by our standard.
Fred, can I just ask, because you're here, I can ask you a question that I would love to know. And you have so much, again, you're like the person, the go-to person. This is exciting. So this trend that everyone, so they have so much openness about how it works and what the structure is, but there is an absolute pattern in terms of the people who have Skignigalva. So these people in that you've met, did they talk about how they had these abilities when they were maybe to do stuff when they were little, it went dormant, and then late teens and early 20s, something happened? Is there a similar pattern?
I haven't heard it being talked about like that,
Okay.
mostly because I think they're kind of brought up in communities where this is kind of like normal.
Okay.
And I mean, there's like the person in whose house I stay in this one village pretty regularly. I mean, like he spent half his life in like trance states, and he's a very unusual person under any state of consciousness, and like one of the most fun people I've known. So he's just so immersed in the kind of trance states ethos that is just like, it hasn't had no destructive or menacing effects on him at all. I mean, this is really the way that it differs there, and apparently in Iceland also, from the way it's depicted in the West. It's dark, macabre images of kind of shadows of American horror movies and so on.
Well,
But it's
we've
not like
lost
that
the
at all.
traditional safe containers and the
Yeah, but
methodology.
that's good.
We've thrown everything away, and so that stuff bubbles up again. You've lost the cultural knowledge around it. Yeah.
But yes, I mean, even though people don't talk about stuff like that because it's such a normal part of culture there that there's that still that they've had breakthrough experiences at a certain point. Usually when they're as Paul, about 18 years old, and it's brought about by some completely unexpected incident like Paul had.
Yeah.
And that reconnected him up with his kind of karmic and dharmic life forces. And here he is today, looking beautiful and looking like a old.
I love you too.
Perhaps doing the work you were meant and destined to do, one hopes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
and you both have something similarly, and maybe it's more common than I recognize, and that is that people who go into the field of academia, but both of you have spent a lifelong journey into this aspect of religious studies, but you both also, like Corinne said, it was her interest in God. It was something deeper, more passionate. It was like, I need to have some answers. I need to know. I need to connect the dots. So it's not just about becoming a professor and teaching something and all of
You
that.
were compelled to
it's
answer
your own
some
personal
questions for
journey,
yourself.
right? And
Yeah.
so, Fred, I know that's a very broad question I'm bringing up. So that we'll put that as part of that other conversation as well.
But what I would say is that religious studies will beat it out of you. I don't know if Fred's
yeah.
had that experience.
Ah.
It's
That's
like,
interesting.
I was going to major in music, and I thought, I don't want to ruin music by majoring in it. It'll just make it work. And religious studies, actually theology is a class. Theology is something that I took on because of that. I thought, I can make meaning, bring hope and meaning into these conversations where I'd be helping people. But I got into, this lefty, wonderful, wonderful theology that kind of takes away the idea of God as an actor in the world. It's more about fulfilling the political sort of agenda of Jesus, on earth. I mean, it was really very grounded. And I went from there into religious studies, and all my colleagues at that point were, just, they didn't even want to talk about religion. It was postmodern philosophy at Syracuse. I don't know if Fred knows about this. I was the oddball. So I spent my time with anthropologists because they dared to actually talk about religion. And then going to India and having that all knocked out of my head because I realized, no, people are here for the power of what these saints can give. Don't keep talking about politics. So, wow. All right. And then, so I've been shaken all over the place. So yes, it started there, but then it went away. And then, it's just,
She was lucky to be at Syracuse where she had such copacetic mentors.
Absolutely.
Whom of course I know them, but but Corinne needs to be assured that ever since then, she has made beautiful music.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Fred mentioned in 2 weeks the panel discussion on encounters in the field with the unexplained. And what I like about the assembled guests is Christine Van Poel and an archaeological dig in Mesoamerica and the American Southwest. And then Fred in India with contemporary current ritual. And then Thomas Riccio around the world. So we're covering the globe here, past to present. So it's going to be an interesting discussion.
And Corinne, of course, you're welcome to join us if your time allows. And it'll be really fun to,
Yeah,
So,
indeed. So thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments, Fred, before I click you off the screen?
No, you can click me off. It's her show, and I'm ecstatic to be here. I'm in an ecstatic trance right now.
No charge.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Fred. So we'll bring back the historian and then someone who would be willing to talk to us about their personal experience and what they do. I understand there's a range. People who talk to those departed, as you mentioned in that trance. Ghost hunters, is that where something's being haunted and they want to find and release the spirits? Healers. And then seers, the future prophecy, read your heart. That was very interesting for somebody to read what's going on and help. Could you discuss the range of who you met in Iceland and their skills?
So there's a couple ways to answer that. And the first is the range of skignigalva, what that means, right? So how does it show up in people? And so there's patterns, some things more common than others. One that I find interesting because I hear about it here as well, is that people who, and this is unnerving, who can somehow, they get flashes of and sometimes dreams of things that are catastrophes ahead.
Right.
And that can be really frightening. And for some people that when they were younger, and again, I'm talking to people who are now using their abilities, so they've come around. For them, when they were younger and didn't understand what was going on, they felt when the catastrophe happened that they were causing it. So for them, this was incredibly traumatic. I mean, they just didn't get what was going on. So that's one way. Another would be some people just hear, they don't see. Mm-hmm. And this would be the case of one woman, Hulda, who had an imaginary friend growing up, and her family was not into this at all. So it wasn't, normal. Some places it's more normal than others. So she would she'd play with her. They'd play together, and they'd talk, and she would have this voice going on in her head all the time. And she would talk back out loud, and then they made fun of her. And so she stopped talking back out loud, and she realized that she answered in her head, she could still have this conversation. And then it went away and came back, and now she uses that voice in different ways. Some people can just read, like reading people's hearts. They can read people really well. And then, it's kind of subtle, but they're understood to have an ability. And in one case in particular, they easily can go into trance. I mean, it's not necessarily people who can read, it's just anybody, but there's subtle things that happen, but you still have this ability to move out of the way. I mean, trance is fascinating. It's just basically you're moving your consciousness out of the way so that people can come in. And it's very much protected by the prayers of the people around you. They say a prayer first. They do the sign of the cross. I mean, there's so much Catholicism that has hung on despite the switch to, and like the old traditions hang on, Catholicism hangs on. I mean, all these things hang on at some level. So that is interesting because when you're in trance, if you are in a deep trance, you can't remember a thing. And then if you can be in a really shallow trance, you can actually be somewhat aware, and they describe it as though someone's in the next room talking. Mm-hmm. And the problem with being in shallow trance for some is that you tend to want to interject, and so it's not as true. The benefit, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you don't want to have that spirit saying everything, and maybe that spirit is out of hand or something. I mean, there's so many different ways of packaging this. But the problem, apparently, of going into very deep trance is that it's hard on your body. So all your bodily sort of processes slow down. You should not eat food before you go into the deeper trance because it messes up your system. But going down into it and then revving up again. And they say that people that do regularly deep trance don't live very long.
Oh wow.
So they, there's a incentive not to do very much deep trance. It depends. Mm-hmm. So there's people who can see the future. They can see what people are thinking. They know about people, a sense of who they are. They can heal. Healing obviously is a big thing. And a lot of them who are healers talk about kind of doing this naturally when they were kids, and some of them had models. Pets. Pets, exactly. Cows, exactly. And then in all cases the system works that they understand when they start working that spirit that's been bugging you, who becomes your partner, will be a partner in the healing process, or someone who might be a gatekeeper in the, so healing and trance are the two big things that are there, using abilities that are different forms in a particular way. So different abilities, and then these particular practices. So if you're a healer, hands-on healer, you will start out with someone who's been bugging you. And as you continue in your practice, others will join. And typically the idea is, I feel this is so funny. I'm saying this stuff and I'm thinking this is outlandish, but this is how it works. Anyway, so other people, I believe them, so other people will join, meaning that you will then they will have specialties. So Matti, for instance, he has Dr. Matthias, who is actually his namesake, who came to a middle when his mother was pregnant, said, you need to name your son Matthias, because this guy who's a doctor in spirit wants him to be named that. Anyway, so Matti has that name. So he's like one of the main healers who's good at heart issues. And it turns out he was actually a cardiologist of sorts from far back. And he has a nun, a lot of nuns in American, Native Americans. Anyway, she does, I'm not going to get the details straight, but I think she does the muscular skeletal stuff. He has another doctor that does the psychological stuff. So depending on what the problem is, different spirits are going to come into the room. And for him, the way, and again, this is another variation, he does healing, but he does reflexology. So while he's doing reflexology, he goes into very, very light trance so that he can see what's in the room and who's there and get some direction.
And so how is the healing applied? Energetically, or do people feel what's happening? What is that process like?
So again, there's no one right way. So Matti happens to have learned reflexology, and he does that. Yeah. Other people will totally. I mean, I had to, have people.
That's field work
on me, because that's my work. So other people will. Guðbjörg will sit you in her recliner, and she'll hold on to your feet also, but it's not reflexology. And then she'll kind of go into light trance and see things. And work on healing. And another woman, Austis, who actually helps women get pregnant. She's got fascinating stories. She starts at the feet, but then she goes up to the head, and she does more like a Reiki sort of thing. And I never had a session with Ingveldur, who does, I think she does more, she doesn't touch the body, but it's more energy. So there's no one
different
way.
Methods. Yeah.
And they learn according to really what's going on and what they perceive, right? So again, it's not about the tradition that they're working with, it's what they understand the spirits to be guiding them to do right now in my body.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah.
Tony has his hand up, and then Nick has his hand up. Tony, you first.
Okay, thank you. This is all amazing, and I have 1,000 questions, but I'll try to be more succinct than that. In terms of voices, I've had a number of experiences where I've heard my own voice. It's not that I can attribute to anybody else, and sometimes I'm surprising myself. Encountering a friend who had lost her glasses, for example, the voice came out of my mouth and spoke, "Come with me, I know where they are." And this was several blocks away in the city, and she had been looking for them for an hour at the place she had been. I walked over to the place, went into the ivy, bent over, and handed her glasses, and that was kind of interesting. But also, there are times of danger. I used to do whitewater canoeing, often on wild rivers and flood stage, and once I was in deep trouble, and the voice told me everything to do. Nobody could have rescued me but myself, and I was upside down in a turbulent river, and step by step by step. In other situations where I've encountered people with weapons and things like that, the same thing has happened. So anyway, I wanted to simply say this is my experience, not so much somebody else speaking. It's always me, I think, or some aspect of me that I don't know well. I'm also interested, is there any correlation of these events happening more densely in the presence of volcanism, in the presence of the aurora, of things like that? Does this change the parameters?
I have not heard that. See, that would be a good question to ask someone. So we're going to get an Icelander on here to help you with that.
I would say heightened danger, heightened emotional need, really tends to, that heightened need tends to call it forth as well, don't you think?
So what I'm listening to you say, though, your description is interesting. You say it's me, it's my voice, but it's not your. So Tony, I'm just thinking it's not you though, right? Because what you say surprises you.
Yeah, but the voice
So-
comes out of my mouth.
Right. So what that would be like, although it's not at all like it, is in trance, that's what happens. That
The transmutation.
they're using the body like almost like a puppet. I'm going to use the
Megaphone.
vocal cords to speak, and so they do. It's that person's voice. Their consciousness is moved off to the side, but they're being used in order to express whatever it is. In a lot of cases, because they're healing circles, they're expressing their angst. And the circle is telling them, it's okay. Everyone does horrible things, or whatever. The conversations are really interesting, but it is the medium's voice that they're using. So
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
it's just fascinating.
I'm just
well,
glad
thank
it
you.
came to rescue you in times of need, Tony.
Yeah.
This is so incredibly interesting. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Nick. Nick, hi, Nick. And then Frederick's going to come on also.
Nick is, I think, muted.
Two things. First, I was raised in the church, and I learned there was 5 aspects to prayer: glorification, forgiveness, thanksgiving, petition, and intercession. And what I realized is that that did not involve listening. What was really missing was listening. And that's what really got me into the journey that I've been on, where I used, as a psychologist, I used like the last 50 years hypnosis. And then about 20 years ago, I discovered a static trance. And they're both avenues of trance I found very valuable and have become big parts of my life.
So can you tell me, Nick, so trance now I understand, I have understood, but I use it in a very narrow way. So can you say a little bit more about what that is?
The what?
The
Ecstatic trance is what we do. He's a member of our community.
If you've read Carlos Castaneda, he talks about dreaming and stalking. To me, hypnosis is dreaming. It's letting go of your thinking and seeing where it takes you, while a static trance is much more directed. It is, you go to it with intent, and there's a very directive energy in a static trance. And so to me, actually, I think some people are much more effective at a static trance, others at hypnosis. But I found that both of them really are a big part of my life.
Yeah.
The other part of the question I have is when in my journeys to Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. In Denmark, I joined at one point a midsummer solstice bloat or celebration with Thorn Scythe, the worship of the old gods. Now I know they have an active church in Iceland. Have you had contact with Thorn Scythe?
No, but Augusta, which I haven't had contact with, it's bigger there, right? It's also true because it has that little mark over the A. And I mentioned to Laura Lee and to Paul that they might be interesting to bring here because they really do consciously connect to the old tradition. And I don't believe they do spirit work much, but maybe they do ecstatic trance. That's quite possible.
I try to, I have a regular contact with Asatru. One of my warnings early when I got into it, one of my good friends who had Bell, he was at the University of Colorado, who had his degree in Icelandic literature. He told me, be careful, stay away from Asatru because they're very nationalistic in terms of Nazism and German. And so I have sensed that, but that's really, I have withdrawn from that part of it, really, in my writing. I've done quite a bit of writing in the area.
The Aryan mission thing, okay.
But Asatru, I have, especially from the Prosetta and from Beowulf, I've found a lot of power in both stories in terms of healing. I think both stories are stories of the process of healing, and I found them very valuable, and I've written about those. But anyway, so you say that Asatru is pretty big in Iceland, so.
Yeah, in fact, I don't know much about them, and I kind of assumed that they were Icelandic, but I guess it's larger than Iceland.
We can find
Okay.
out.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it really,
Yeah.
I think, begins with the Prosetta, which was Icelandic, but
Okay.
it really is big. I know it was at 19 or 2004 in Denmark. Isotru applied to the state church, the Lutheran church, to become an official church,
Yeah.
and they were accepted as a church
Yeah.
in Denmark, and
And
that's
Iceland also, they are.
in
Yeah.
Sweden too.
Yeah.
And soon after that is when I joined their midsummer solstice celebration. So,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much,
Very
Nick.
fascinating what you
Yeah.
had to say
I'm
today.
glad you joined
Thanks,
us today.
Nick.
Yeah, it's a nice
Yeah.
addition.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're going to go to Frederick again. And
Oh, okay.
you get your
Right.
hand
Let me
up.
unmute.
You
Oh,
You got
am
a
I
hand up.
muted?
Yeah.
No, I'm not muted. Yes, as regular question here. I was interested about the woman who could create or allow an infertile couple to achieve pregnancy. Of course, we've seen things like that in India a lot. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of that. And I just wonder whether they spoke about the mechanism for which
Yeah.
they did that.
Yeah. Alstis, who's just this warm, wonderful person. I just, yeah, it's interesting. She, has learned things along the way. She was somebody who, when she was 16, things came on like gangbusters and they closed her down. I'm sorry, I'm backing up a little bit. A lot of these folks who are really terrorized by this ability go to mediums and get closed.
What does that mean? Like voluntarily? Like please shut
Yeah.
it
Oh
down?
yeah. They cannot handle it. And actually I do know people who are not part of the community, who are not part of Andleg Mal, who said that, and they're just out, but they were terrified. So really, there's so much bubbling up. So she's one of those folks. She ended up doing trance for a while. So she opened up again. It kind of runs in her family, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, and eventually she got into this work of working with women. And I don't think it happened right away, Fred, but eventually she was able to see. And she has to time it. Okay, yeah, see, it's coming back to me. So she times it for when she tells, okay, figure out when you're ovulating, have sex, and come see me, then.
Oh.
And so the women, follow her instructions, they come see her, and she's able to see somehow and manipulate. She says, I know this sounds crazy, but it's like surgery, opening the fallopian tubes. I'm not sure of the technical part. And she said, I can see it. I can see when, it's worked. And her track record is excellent. And she's done for other people. She's done things like that, not for being conceiving, but for like one person for a heart. He was having a heart transplant and it was a certain time in Reykjavik and she was able to do it long distance. She has a story that, the doctor thought they were going to do one thing, but they found out it was going to be easier because of something that they didn't understand, but that she'd done. And
Wow, so it's not verified
she's
that way.
just about as down to earth and humble. And at first, wasn't wanting to talk to me because she just doesn't want to, so just talk about herself. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But yeah, the time she has the ovulation figured out, they have sex, and then she opens it, and that's how conception happens. And what happens, the thing that is hard on her, and part of the reason she didn't want to talk to me, is that the people who come to see her, many of them are not. This is true for healers in general. They're at their last resort, right? So these are couples who are suffering terribly from infertility. And Iceland is where you have really big families. So it's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah.
So they come to her with no background or no interest in spirit work, but they're there because they're desperate. She gets them finally, she enables them to get pregnant. And she says, what happens is I see them later with babies. They don't tell me about it. And I know that they're thinking it's just a coincidence.
Oh, so she doesn't even get thanked or
Subject of
credited.
feelings.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting to me because I've heard of that sort of methodology elsewhere in Europe, like in Cyprus, but I have not heard of it in India, that level of kind of physiological manipulation. and where it's utterly different, where they'll talk about finding the right spirit and placing the spirit into the womb and so on, often an ancestral spirit. But this, I mean, but what you're saying is, I mean, it really, I mean, it really sounds right in a way.
Yeah.
I have an amusing story to share on this. So we went on a tour of Mexico, all of the Mayan pyramids. We actually brought our own group and did this. And one of them was a fertility expert counselor. And so we're going through the museums as well as the sites, and she sees this giant phallus, this art piece, this reproduction of one of the artifacts. She has to buy it. And so she's saying, I'm putting this right on my desk. And I go, well, that's going to be interesting. That's going to jumpstart a conversation with the women that come in about, I can't get pregnant. And she said, later we checked in with her and I said, well, how is the phallus doing its job? And she says, yes, the eyes get big. I invite the women, just come and, embrace this, right? Handle this. And they're shy at first, but then, she said, I think it opens up something in their minds to really kind of accept that. She says, I think there's this psychological shift that is taking place in just confronting this, embracing this, because we have such taboos around this. She goes, something shifts, and they get pregnant. And then she was also telling me that the other thing she does is she advises women who can't get pregnant to hold babies, because she says that it jumpstarts the oxytocin and the hormones in their own bodies, and it makes their own biochemistry more receptive to that. Like there's a tuning effect or something.
Interesting.
So, and I just had to share that because I thought that was interesting. So who knows what those phalluses were created for as artistic pieces? Maybe those were the doctors of old, the fertility specialists of old. I don't know.
Well, thanks again, Fred.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I also want to ask you before we end, but I want to really hear from Sister Margaret, a Catholic nun who's also a longtime ecstatic transplant practitioner and member of our community. But before you end, you are out on a limb. You are daring with your work, Corinne, and I want to know how your colleagues, how I think you're tenured, how the academic world is embracing this. Any pushback that you've gotten, that you've been scolded, you've gone too far. I want to hear about that. But first, let's talk to Sister Margaret, because I applaud you for following where the evidence and your own personal experience leads you. So.
Hello, Sister Margaret. Yeah,
Hello there.
Well, I think I've said this before. The world here in North America is much less accepting than the world in South America. And so in the academic world, I don't find very much acceptance at all. I think we are too attuned to logic and rational thinking. It seems very difficult for North Americans to risk letting go of that.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah.
And embarrassing, and a lot of things. Right. Yeah. So I can say, the reason why I'm so daring is because I have tenure, but also because I've walked, into it through these different interactions. First in Kerala with the stories of miracles and understanding how saints work for people not in this country. This is a world of things going on, but also the Hindu temple in upstate New York. Things happened to me there that I had to admit to in order to honor the trust that people put in me. If people are going to talk to me about what matters to them deeply, and it has to do with things that expand our very tight, constrained worldview, if I left that out, especially if I had experiences myself, that is a dishonor, I think, the trust that they put in me.
Thank you.
So I think it's my job to be honest, and I'm on a limb, but it's okay. And I have yet to have anyone because my book's an Oxford Press, right? And it's been reviewed in academic journals, and no one has told me I'm full of it. So I've somehow managed. But you're so right. It's a cultural shift. That's unfortunate how tightly bound we are to a certain way of thinking, and it's actually much narrower and much less. I don't know. I think we're the fuddy-duddies, basically.
We Westerners, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Stay on, Margaret. I want to invite Brian Tucker, because the other part of your work is something that I want to also have a conversation on. And Sister Margaret, being a member of the St. Joseph of Carondelet, gave us a beautiful talk as well that we have up on YouTube. Brian has given us a beautiful talk on the new story of the universe. And he works with sisters as who've also been part of the Thomas Berry new story, and creating rituals that they feel inspired from a higher source. Anyway, there's a conversation fomenting here, and I know that you have this wonderful other body of work, Corinne, where you've talked with many of the elderly, those in embodied spiritual traditions and in the church.
So Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just, Corinne, if you could give any more voice to how you're interested in the kind of the feminine wisdom, the traditions that are championed right now, I see within those women religious particularly, but if you see any more example of that in your studies in India or in Iceland, and how that's contributing to the world today. And that's kind of an area that I'm very fascinated with.
Yeah, I wish wouldn't that be awesome if I had stuff.
You've interviewed many, though.
It's something for me to think about. It's a framework, right? That I am not bringing to stuff right now. So I've talked to 91 women. I've interviewed them. California here, my mom's, 20 here in this retirement home, 19 in Iceland, 32 in Kerala, South India, because they are so diverse, and then 20 at the Sisters of St. Joseph in Rochester, asking them just about what matters, what is holy to you. I mean, some of these women are atheists, and what are stories from childhood that stay with you, and it's such a rich collection of things, and I have a book figured out, but. Yeah, what you've just said there is not a framework I'm working with, something to consider. And they are all women, certainly, but and they have a special way of being in the world, especially their generation. I think there's just anyway, I can't.
I think there's a lot of wisdom there that you're helping to bring out and make accessible to the mainstream. Yeah. Nature, what is the role of nature and spirituality in all of this? So
from
each of you,
Sister Margaret, I just want to say this is so fascinating to me when I'm butting in, but I would ask all of them, what do you consider to be sacred? Just tell me what, just blanket, doesn't matter, not churchy, but just what do you consider to be sacred? Every single one of the sisters, except for one, immediately, there's no question, they didn't even pause. They did this body thing, a lot of them pointed to the window and they said nature. I mean, that is where they find the holy, absolutely. And that was uniform in Iceland and California as well, not in India. Because nature is hard. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, so yeah.
How would you answer that question, Sister Margaret? How would you answer that? Yeah. She puts a lot of thought to it.
Yeah.
So.
I was thinking about your point that there's no one way. To me, I think that has been the most important learning. that there are so many ways. But yes, I would say most of us would probably answer that nature is a primary connection.
And then how that's understood is going to vary, right? For some people, it's the garden, and for other people, it's a particular tree, or for some, it's a field with sheep in it. I mean, it's just that can mean in itself so many things.
Yeah.
Well, here's a story about how much potency there is in nature. And when we're talking about who are the healers, who was it? Ipupiora told us a story about there in South America. He's a rainforest shaman, his wife was from Peru, and they wanted to go on a healing. They wanted to go find a healer in that area. Everyone said the most powerful healer lives way up in this remote village, quite the hike. And so they take this arduous journey. They finally arrived. She's in a tiny little hut. She comes out, she greets them. She knew they were coming, though nobody told them. She knows exactly what's going on. She goes out to a tree and she pulls a twig down. And this is her wand. This is her instrument to heal, a living twig that she had just asked the tree permission, gave it an offering, and she does this miraculous healing with this. And he said, it just showed me the power of nature to work through us. I was expecting ritual tools and elaborate this and elaborate that. No. She was so simple. She was right there living in the midst of nature. She was there speaking with it. She worked it through her hand. There it was in a twig, right? So I think that we tend to discount the power of nature and what it brings to us.
And overcomplicate ritual, but yeah, both.
Yeah,
exactly.
So,
Well,
anyway.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sister Margaret.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Corinne.
Brian.
Thank you, Sister Margaret.
We look forward to this conversation continuing on that score. And Brian's another one of those people that has brought us so many connections. And so it's nice when I can bring one to him. And you were one, Corinne. So appreciate that. Do we have any concluding remarks? Thoughts?
That's our responsibility.
I appreciate that you have really told us the story of your research and your eyewitness reports and your own personal experiences in this, and that I do believe that there is so much more that we as Westerners close off for whatever reason that we do, that demands our attention, our respect, our personal experience, direct experience, to really show us the full measure of what it is to be human, what our responsibility is here on earth, how we listen to this guidance from a larger source about what is our path, what are our gifts. And the gifts aren't ours. We're just a conduit for that, right? If the gifts are given to us to help us make the effect to walk that path that we're assigned, we got to listen to that. I appreciate that the more mainstream this becomes, the more that we who had these awakenings in our childhood, in our life, will be supported by the family members who will help guide us, so we don't have to go through these crises, right? So that we and our culture can rise up to guide as nature wants to work through us, as these imperatives, as these dynamics, as these emergent impulses want to work through us. It's our job, right? We are part of the evolutionary arc. I truly believe that. And we need to work through it in all of its measure, to be all of our measure, to be the full effect of who we can be. And you are helping to, the stories that you're sharing are guiding the way. I want to invite you back to have the conversation about all these women and their wisdom, because why not listen to our elders? They have so much to share. And I appreciate that you are doing that job, and also to bring back some of those Icelanders, the historians, the healers, the mediums, bring who you wish, because we have questions and want to understand more how it works. And I know that there are many in our audience today, in our community, who have these gifts, who are working with them in various ways. Let's share notes along the path. Let's share notes and have this dialogue out in the open, bring it out in the open, push it to the mainstream, because we need to, in order for us to get through the challenges ahead, we need everything that we have at hand. We need all of the gifts on the table on all levels. So thank you, Corinne, for all the work and for being here with us today and sharing your story. What a wonderful adventure. What a wonderful adventurous life that you are living and sharing. Okay.
Thank you, both of you, for having me. I really, really appreciate the opportunity, because, thank you.
Any last words of wisdom? What to look for? Mention your books, something.
Yeah.
Something? Yeah.
Find my book. Yeah, tell people about it. I do think it is a bridge. The book itself is a bridge because these are people like many of us who live lives like many of us, and their experiences I think are worth thinking about and connecting to. So yeah.
Well, it's important too. Like many of us have European ancestry, and we're all looking for that connecting point back to some of this original theme of spirituality that we could connect with, and not discounting tradition or religious paths, but just saying that there were those of us who are looking beyond that, or to the side of that, looking for our own path. And so it helps when we find researchers like yourself that are willing to go out there and get the stories and bring it back to us, so we can integrate that into our own lives.
So I would say it's not like I went out looking for it either.
It came
right?
and got you.
No, absolutely none of the situations did I go out looking for it. It all just happened to me. So I don't get credit for that. I
like the Harry Potter scene where the mail just keeps coming until the messages keep coming until you cannot deny them. Anymore.
I sort of feel that about this role that I have with this institute, that I was grabbed by the scuff of the neck and saying, "Get the hell over here, do something. Stop wasting your time."
Oh yeah. They collared him. Couldn't
exactly.
resist. I also appreciate the divine wisdom. I love women finding their voice, and I love you supporting other women, giving more voice. I appreciate Sister Margaret that bridges both the church and the ecstatic trance tradition of the indigenous.
Right.
That was a church as well. That was a temple. That was a body of knowledge. And I appreciate all the sisters, and want to hear more from them about how they're bringing more of openness, more ritual, more power of ritual, and listening to within. I think as Brian was expressing, just a really important. This is divine wisdom finding its place again, reclaiming its role in these diversity of voices. Men finding it as well as women, and I think it's just so much part of the equation to write our path going forward. So I celebrate that. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so
Go
much.
girl.
Yeah,
I always say a girl stands for goddess in real life.
Right.
Wow.
That's
okay.
my motto.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Laura's held a workshop with that title in the past.
Had a T-shirt.
Yeah, and the
Awesome.
T-shirt. She's got the T-shirt. I'm going to ask everybody to unmute themselves and say thank you to Corinne, and thank you all for joining us today. To go ahead and speak
Corinne
up.
Dempsey,
Thank you.
DEMPSEY. You'll find her. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Great program. Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Frederick and Tony.